Chapter 9 of The King's Daughter. The King's Daughter by Pansy. Chapter 9. The Tea Party. I will make you fishers of men. There'll be a high old time to-night, Miss Dell, I just expect. I don't look for nothing else. Sallie volunteered this information as she cleared off the dinner table. Dell turned from the window where she had been overseeing some of Katie's operations, and gave Sallie the benefit of a bright smile as she questioned: "What kind of a time is that, Sallie?" "Why, there's a barn raising up in the hollow, and the folks will be coming home about dark, and the way they'll pour in here won't be slow, and they smokes and drinks most generally them times till 12 o'clock, and sometimes they gets pretty merry." Dell's smile had vanished, and her eyes had an indignant flash. "I thought they had those disgraceful scenes in the barn after it was raised, at the expense of the owner." "So they does, the workers, but these fellows that come in here are the hangers on like, who don't do no work, and can't get in at the supper, so you see they comes here." The face over by the window was turned suddenly away from Sallie, and the fair, brown head drooped low. This was bitter truth to which she had been listening. Her father's guests were those who were not sufficiently respectable to be admitted to the regular merry makings, and so took refuge with him. There were times when those disgraceful truths surged over Dell with such overwhelming power that it seemed to her she must sink beneath them. She struggled against this feeling now. She battled with her hot indignant tears; they should not fall, they could do no good. She was put here for work, not for weeping. But what to do? Suddenly she turned again to Sallie. "Who told you about all this?" Sallie tossed her head contemptuously. "Oh, Sam Miller did. He knows everything that's a-going on, and more too. If there's a thing in Lewiston that that fellow don't know about unless it's his own business, I'd like to hear what it is." Dell left her abruptly to search for Sam. He was in the bar room, and for a wonder it had no other occupant. She leaned coaxingly over the dirty counter. "Sam, does father know about the raising this afternoon?" Sam stared. "Not as I knows on," he said, at last. "No, I guess he don't. There hain't been a soul in that spoke of it, as I've heard. He never goes, Miss Bronson." This last was in a tone intended to be encouraging. "Well, now," said Dell, in confidential tones, "I want father all to myself this evening. Don't tell him anything about the raising, and if I succeed in getting him to come with me, can't you attend to things here, and not let him be called whoever comes? And, Sam, won't you keep things quiet out here for me?" Sam looked at her solemnly. The poor drunkard understood her object as plainly as though she had expressed it in words, and felt a pitiful kind of sympathy for her struggles after her father. He even thought, in a weak, childish sort of way, that if she or somebody were struggling after him in that eager fashion, he would give up the rum for her sake. Meantime, of course, he forgot the struggling wife at home, and little Mamie. "I'll do it if I can," he said, impressively. "I'll do the very best I can, but I don't know how much it will be." "I'll trust you," said Dell, with a peculiar earnestness in her voice, and then she vanished. Her father was in the garden, hoeing. Thither she followed him, and promptly introduced her subject. "Father, I am going to have a tea party this afternoon. Will you come?" "Not I," he answered, emphatically. "Have your tea parties, and welcome, child. I'm glad to see you gay. I ain't stingy. You're welcome to all the good things you want, but don't expect me to come to 'em." "Ah, but I do," and Dell leaned both hands on his arm in a coaxing, winning fashion that reminded him, in spite of himself, of the days when he was young, and Dell's mother clung to his arm. "I depend on you. I have my plans all made, and you will spoil them all if you don't come, for you see there is not to be another living being there but you and me." Her father stared at her in a blank surprise for a few minutes, then he leaned over his hoe and chuckled. "You're a queer fish," he said, at last. "Now what notion will you take next, I wonder? I'll be blamed if you ever took one like anybody else since you was born." "Will you come?" Dell repeated, with pretty persistency. "I'm going to have just such things as you like best, for supper, and I shall have the tea room all brightened up beautifully, so much pleasanter than that long table, and I never sit down with you there, you know. Will you promise?" Mr. Bronson shook his head. "I can't, child. I've got to eat my supper with the folks. They're good enough for me, and you might sit down with us if you would. It wouldn't look well to see me away from my own table. Can't you be invited out to tea once in a while as well as anybody else? I tell you it is my tea party, and, father, don't you remember how you and mother and I used to have tea together all alone, once in a while, when I was a little bit of a girl? Oh, father, I have not had you all to myself once since I came home, and I want it so much. Won't you come?" It was a mistake to suppose that a rumseller has no heart. They are hard to reach, it is true, and I doubt if Jonas Bronson was sure that he had one until Dell's pleading set it into unusual motion. He looked down almost tenderly on the earnest young face. "Well," he said at last, "it's as silly a piece of business as I've ever heard of, but land's sake, if it will do you any good, I might as well eat my supper in that room for once as t'other one, so if I get back in time, I'll come." "Oh, are you going away?" she asked, with dismayed face and beating heart. What if he should be going to drop in at the raising after all? "Got to go to the Corners this afternoon to see Jim Turner on business, and I declare for it, I ought to be off this minute." The bright look returned. "Oh, you'll get back," she said gaily. "I know you will. You wouldn't disappoint me for all the Jim Turners in creation. I know you won't." It is a wonderful thing sometimes to trust a man. Perhaps after all it was more that last sentence than anything else that made Mr. Bronson actually hasten his movements, and so drive up to his house 10 minutes before 6. Meantime Dell had not been idle. The tea room was a marvel of freshness and beauty. There were flowers and mosses, and also a most dainty spread tea table. Muffins made by Dell's own hand, such as Sallie might have tried in vain to manufacture. She stood looking at it all when the work was done, with a pleased face. She did not expect her father to notice the flowers and mosses; even if he did, he would be likely to call them trumpery, but she had a fancy that the general effect of grace and beauty might linger in his memory as a pleasant thing. She was on the watch, and ran to the door at the first sound of the wheels, and presently carried her father in gleeful triumph to the tea room, and seated him in the great armchair, with a fresh newspaper in hand, while she went to her muffins. It was a queer little supper. The father and daughter, sitting opposite each other at that round table, had not apparently a single idea in common. The father seemed to feel it most, and it tinged his manner with embarrassment; but Dell exerted herself to talk and laugh, and wait on him; and the muffins and cold chicken he certainly enjoyed, likewise the pickled lobster, sent from Boston on purpose for him, Dell informed him. "You're a good cook," he said, complacently, as he finished his 4th cup of tea and arose from the table. "And a good girl, I guess. I reckon they hain't spoilt you in Boston, for all they tried. Anyhow, things are different about the house. You needn't think I don't notice things, 'cause I do. I know when a bed is made comfortable and when it ain't, as well as the next man. Your mother was a master hand at making a bed, and you've took after her." Dell had made her father's room over in every imaginable aspect, since her return home, and now had it under her daily supervision, so that from being the dingiest and most ill-kept room in the house, it had grown into one that was always fresh and cheery. This was the first time her father had by word or look evinced any knowledge of the change. It was something to know that he appreciated his bed. She sprang up eagerly; he was looking around for his hat. "Oh, father, read the newspaper a few minutes, while I get rid of this table, and then I have got something to show you. Here is a Boston daily, which came just a few minutes ago." "I don't know about it," he said doubtfully. "I guess I ought to go." Nevertheless, he took the paper and sat down, while Dell almost breathlessly hurried the dishes out to Katie. Every nerve was on the alert. There was a drawn battle between the tea room and the bar room that evening, and the daughter knew only too well what a powerful ally that bar room possessed. She came in with a small square board filled with pegs, and watching her chance as the paper began to be turned restlessly, she produced it. "Father, are you as sharp at puzzles as you used to be? Do you remember those you used to get out for mother? Here is one that I have looked at a great many times, and I don't get it at all." "Oh, I don't fuss at such nonsense now," he said loftily. "I used to amuse your mother in that way once in a while, and so you remember it, do you? That's queer now, you was just a little mite of a child." "I wish you would help me with this," Dell said, bending over it with a perplexed face. "I can't see through this in the least, and it provokes me to fail in anything. Whereupon her father chuckled admiringly. "It does, eh? You're a chip off the old block. I've seen the time that I've bothered for hours over the things, and I always beat 'em, too. Let's see this one." Never, surely, was the game of solitaire so closely and eagerly watched. Dell bent over the board with glowing cheeks and shining eyes, having in her heart the eager hope not that he would succeed, but that he would fail again and again; for this once accomplished, what could she do next? There seemed little fear of its being accomplished. Apparently he had found something that could beat him. He knitted his brows, and pulled out the pegs and stuck them in every imaginable way, and finally threw it down with an impatient, "Pshaw! The thing is a humbug. There can't nobody do it." "How provoking!" Dell said, innocently. "Professor Thompson can do it in a twinkling. I've seen him. But he does it so fast, you can't tell anything about it. Uncle Edward and I have sat and looked right at him, and then tried, and we couldn't get it." "Your Uncle Edward can't get it, eh? With all his book learning. That's a smart notion." And he drew it toward him again, and presently the wrinkles came in his forehead, and he was again absorbed. Dell looked about her for a fan, and fanned hard and fast. She trembled visibly, she had been so frightened lest the puzzle had failed her. There came a low tap at the side door. She arose and opened it softly. It was Sallie, respectful and sympathetic, perfectly comprehending what her young mistress was about. She spoke in whispers. "Mr. Elliot and Mr. Nelson are waiting in the parlor to see you, Miss Dell." Dell did not hesitate for an instant. "Tell them I am very much engaged, and they must excuse me this evening. And, Sallie, if any one else should call, just excuse me without coming." Slowly but surely the evening waned, and still the puzzle held sway. They held conversation over it now and then. Her father called it the "confoundest thing that ever got hold of him," and slammed it down on the table several times, and as often some innocent remark of Dell's about Uncle Edward's trials over it would give him a fresh impulse. Suddenly a prolonged and triumphant "Aha!" announced a victory. He had accomplished the feat. But even then Dell had to be taught, and she proved a stupid pupil, and when she finally felt that it would be wise to learn, her father immediately said: "There, you've got it. Now I must go. I don't know what that Sam may be about. That lobster of yours must have been uncommon salt. I'm as dry as a fish." Dell sprang up eagerly. "Oh, are you? How glad I am! I have been hoping you would say so. Now, I am going to give you a splendid surprise. You think, I suppose, that Sallie knows how to make coffee, but you wait just a minute, and see what you think of mine." There was a low call to Sallie, who seemed to be in waiting, a few hurried words with her, and in a very few moments thereafter her father was drinking a cup of very strong, very richly sugared, very thickly creamed coffee, precisely what he liked. "It is good, that's a fact," he said, as he poured it down. The little coffee pot was on hand, and Dell hastened to replenish his cup. As she gave it back to him, she asked: "Do you like singing as much as you used to, father? You have not heard me since I came home. I know that old ballad that mother used to sing. I'm going to sing it for you." And immediately her full, rich voice filled the room. Her father drank his coffee more slowly, and presently set down his cup, got out his handkerchief and blew his nose. There were more memories woven around that song than his daughter knew of. He said not a word when it was finished, indeed she hardly gave him a chance, but warbled off into another old song. He listened, certainly, and that was a great deal. Song after song was finished, and another commenced, and still he sat silent and attentive. Presently his head began to droop, he gave several emphatic nods, and finally settled back against the wall and snored. Dell sang on softly, not daring to stop at first, but soon the snoring became so positive and well defined that she ceased her music. But she stirred neither hand nor foot, and almost wanted to stop breathing. If this blind nap would only wear out the rest of the evening! And so, silent and motionless, she sat through her vigil. The clock from the distant kitchen struck faintly. She tried to count it. Could it be possible that it was 10 o'clock? She drew her tiny watch. Yes, victory! The evening was gone. With a reassuring look at the sleeper, she stole softly from the room, across the dining room and hall, and peeped into the bar room from the half-open door. It was unusually quiet there. A few loungers were in different stages of drunkenness and sleep, the half-filled, badly trimmed lamps cast their smoky light over the miserable scene, It was no part of Dell's intention to make the bar room inviting, so she left it to uninterrupted dirt and gloom. Sam Miller caught a glimpse of her, and came out, speaking earnestly. "I've kept things just as still as I could. There came a lot of fellows about an hour ago, and made a great row, and wanted to see your father, but I told them that he was out to tea and could not be seen, and pretty soon they went off." Dell looked at him gratefully. "I know you have kept it very still, and I thank you. Now, Sam, can't you have these people go away, and put out the lights? It's time, I'm sure, and I don't want father to come here to night." "Yes," Sam said, virtuously, "it is time, that's a fact. Oh, yes, I can manage that for you. I'll send them home." Which he did most unceremoniously. "Here, you Dick Johnson, go and sleep on your own floor, you can't have ours any longer. Jim Cole, get up and go home." And in less than 15 minutes each sleepy loafer had staggered off, and the bar-room lights were out. Dell went swiftly back to her father. He might waken now whenever he chose. A few minutes more, and then a more decided snore than usual aroused him. He looked around with a bewildered air, remarked that he guessed he had fallen asleep, then he yawned and stretched himself, and finally drawing his great watch, said: "Well, I swan, if it ain't going on to 11 o'clock. Why, what the dickens has been going on in the bar-room, I wonder?" "It's all right, father," Dell said, cheerily. "Sam has closed things up, and gone home. I told him you were tired, and I thought you wouldn't be out." "The mischief!" he said, staring. "This is a funny evening, I declare. Well, I am tired, that's a fact. Give me another drink of your coffee, and then I'll go to bed." The door closed on him at last, and Dell sat down with a weary sigh on the couch. The energy was gone, she was tired. A funny evening! Well, it had certainly been a strange one. How hard she had worked, and after all what had she accomplished? It was only one evening. She felt like a feather trying to beat back the waves of the ocean. Would she ever be able to stem the awful tide that was setting against her? She drew the large Bible to her, that she had placed conspicuously on the little table, and wearily turned the leaves, until pausing over the story of the weary fisherman who had toiled all night and taken nothing, she read the story through. Someway it gave her courage. "Nevertheless, at thy command we will let down the net." There was another verse: "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." Was not the message to her? Fishers of men. Wasn't she willing to do the work? What if she did toil all night and take nothing, nevertheless at his command? Who could tell what the fruits of that one evening might be? Couldn't God use her toiling? Wasn't it something to have charmed her father into a quiet evening, instead of leaving him to a drunken revel? Yes, she would toil not only all night, but many nights. Wasn't there always before her the promise, "I will make you fishers of men"? With this to plead, the elder brother's own words, could she ever weary over the toiling? End of Chapter 9. Recording by Trisha G.